Right. Well, good afternoon, good evening to some of you, maybe if you're international, but probably most of you lunchtime or beyond. And we're thankful that you could join Steve, Denny, and myself, my partner in crime here. We've had a little bit of a break, Steve, but we are back
Yes.
at it, and we're looking forward to getting into this conversation today on law practice. Um, these have been something that we've been doing for a few years now and built up quite a library of episodes. So if you are listing in a certain industry or prospecting and want to learn more about a certain industry, definitely go to businessbrokerhq.com. I'll put a link in the chat in a moment, and it's free to join. It's just for business brokers, and there you'll get the whole archive of everything we've ever done and industry insights. We also have a new tool on the website, which is Ask HQ. It's just an AI search. It looks through all of our transcripts of all of our live streams, so you can quickly pull up something probably faster than going into the community, and then you'll have to join the community and be a part of that. But again, it's free, so no cost to you. And if we have an episode on an industry, that means an industry expert like Tom has volunteered to come in and talk for an hour. That is kind of like the industry expert plus, because it's just there's some that don't want to come on, and those that are willing really stand out. And we'll get to introduce Tom in just a moment, as well as Lauren. But while we're still letting people kind of filter in, I want to officially say welcome. And let me just quickly introduce you to Business Broker HQ and what we're doing here. I'm very proud of this community. We're about 1,900 members. Again, just business brokers. And what we wanted to do at the beginning was just take that hallway conversation of an in-person conference and say, hey, you have really good hallway conversations around a beer or coffee, and let's emulate that throughout the year. And so we want this to be conversation. We want you to use the chat, the Q&A, come on live with us. That's awesome when people do that. But the whole community is about really elevating our whole industry. I say it over and over again. This is the most threats, opportunity, definitely the most changes I've ever seen in this industry of just business brokerage. And so we're leaning into that and trying to help everybody become a better business broker. And part of that is to do these industry insights. We do have a mobile app. You can go to businessbrokerhq.com and access the community. Every Tuesday, as we did yesterday, was our foundational show. Every Tuesday, almost without fail, we do Becoming a Better Business Broker, 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern. And that is just where a panel of experts come in. And yesterday we were talking about selling franchises. We might talk about how to, get through due diligence better, or working with buyers. So we just kind of granularly go through the industry, great conversations. And so if you'd like to watch any of those, there's 2 years worth of content in the community. And again, you can use the Ask HQ to filter through all that. Allie's on break, but usually she does every other week in this same time slot. She'll be back next month for her next episode, but that is really all about positioning and marketing, and having a unique voice and standing out. She's done some great work there, and she'll be back next month. This is what we're doing right now. We'll get with Tom and Lauren in a moment. And if you're not part of one of our peer groups, or if you're not part of a peer group in the industry, I would just say there's no better way to use some of your time than to be part of a peer group. That smaller community and the larger community, that accountability, the sharing of resources, we've just heard nothing but really good things. It's not like all we do is facilitate getting those groups going. So we're not taking credit for that, but it's just what they've been able to do as they start meeting. And so if you'd like to be a part of one of those, you can email John Dre, or you can even put in the chat, your name and email, and that you'd like to be part of a peer group. We'll get you connected to John Dre there. But it's really a great thing to be a part of if you haven't. We are in LinkedIn. We'd love to have you follow us there. We're posting quite often, and that's a good way to keep up with us. We've launched something recently called quickvel.ai. It is really it's free for the first month, so I would definitely recommend just going to quickvel.ai. But it's the whole idea is that it's very quick and something you can do even before getting the listing. Something if you're in front of the seller, You just ask them a few questions, you put in a little bit of information. It does a really good job behind the scenes to get you to a really good report that you can provide to them. And you should see how it works. We're quite proud of it, and it really stands at a different position in the process, not being necessarily the one after getting the listing, but really before and getting to know that business owner. And I'd say it's just a really good conversation starter. So it does give you a nice report, but it's going to allow you to really do some great conversation and get them kind of something from that conversation and give them some sense. And it does have some controls in there for the kind of the broker opinion of value. So you can kind of control it. As we all know, we want to kind of slide that around just a bit based on things we know uniquely. So definitely check that out. And we want to thank all of our sponsors for allowing us to do this. This is not just a thanks to them for their kind of partnership with HQ, but also your partnership and contribution to our industry. We are still Tom and Steve and I were talking earlier, and it still is kind of a little bit of a small pond. We're still a industry that's growing up, and there's not a whole lot of people supporting our small pond, and we are growing up. We're more on the radar than I've ever seen our industry. But we certainly appreciate those that are supporting us in the business brokerage industry, and we want to thank them. So I'm going to stop my sharing, and I want to introduce Tom, who can introduce Lauren. The cool thing, this is our second industry expert from where I live, which is Wilmington, North Carolina. And so I didn't know until we met, 40 minutes ago, that Tom's like, oh, I'm in Wilmington. I was like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. And so we're going to grab coffee and get together. But uh, and we just did one a few months ago with our home health care expert, also in Wilmington. I don't know, Wilmington got Live Oak and all kinds of things going on for us. So it's Business Brokerage Press. So it's a great place to live. And so we are going to get into today's conversation. I wanted to ask Tom just first, as we did, kind of we get to know our guests before we come on. But before I ask that question, let me pause for a second. I want to make sure we got a large audience, and I love to have this be interactive today. So I just want everybody to know you can use the chat. It is open. I'm just making sure that I'm promising something we actually have. So the chat is open to
It's
everyone,
open.
meaning you can chat with everyone by default, and we love to have the conversation happening there. And you can ask your questions. You can use the Q&A under the more option, or you can just raise your hand and come on live. We would love this to be interactive. Otherwise, Steve and I are gonna we don't run out of questions, but we love your involvement in the conversation too. Tom, first of all, to you and Lauren, thanks so much for joining us today. And I think just the first question really is, and as I look at this always is, I was breaking it down for you. We have industry experts that they're like you guys. The law practices change, and we're just going to sell that industry. And then we have those that have a expertise or a specialty, but it's kind of under the general umbrella. And then you have a further breakdown of industry experts who are from that industry, and then you have others that choose the industry and then become the expert. And so we'd love to hear your story of how you got into business brokerage and why law practices, and then maybe introduce Lauren, and then we'll get going with today's conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first introduce Lauren. Lauren Mason with my team is our director of marketing. So welcome, Lauren. I appreciate her being here and help coordinating a lot of this, with you guys, Ron and Steve. So absolutely. So I don't know, going into law, sometimes I joke, poor choices, maybe, poor life choices. No, I think overall from my background for everybody, I hold my law license and my CPA license. So I was a practicing attorney, had my own firm, building my firm, but I had found a niche in doing transactional legal work and some tax planning work for professionals. So a lot of dentists, CPAs, otherwise, that would come into my office. These are clients I had. Maybe we did some estate planning work or we'd done some previous business, and they're like, hey, it's time to sell my firm or I'm already under contract. They brought me kind of the LOI or otherwise. And it's a dentist that's like, yeah, I'm getting $1 million cash at closing. I have to stick around for a little bit and then I'm out. And I just found myself looking around my own firm and like, what am I doing? Like, is this something that essentially, I can do for my law firm? I told you guys before we started, I read this, book called Built to Sell, as an educator of how to do things. And a lot of those concepts hit, right? Of how to build a value out of a professional practice that maybe is really just an extension of you and how to shift that around. And so, um, I decided my entrepreneurial juices needed to get going. And so I launched the Law Practice Exchange back in 2013. So it actually came out of I was in practice working with other professions, saw that nobody was really doing it at the time for law firms specifically. And so the goal was to build it, right? And I mean, when we launched the name Exchange, the overall goal was truly to help build this overall market for buying and selling law firms. And it was a slow build to start, and then it's definitely ramped up over the last couple of years and still fairly small pond as we talk about. But that's really where I came from. So it was what I knew as being a practicing attorney, knowing law firms, the connections in that space, and then building it from there.
Awesome.
Awesome. And Tom, before we let you pause too long here, I'd love for you to also talk about how you built out this marketplace and where you see this going, because I really think that you're out there on the cutting edge of what's happening in our industry, and I'd love for you to speak into that a little bit.
Absolutely. So today, right, it's been an evolution as we've gone through the years and everything else. But one of the biggest things that we had, which is a lot of smaller law firms that still needed help with, selling their firm with succession otherwise. And, based on price, difficulty of getting those firms sold or anything else, it was a real challenge to just deliver the full kind of, typical business broker professional service. And so made the decision a few years ago to develop a marketplace, which is essentially a software application. We call it our Zillow for law firms. Allows sellers and buyers to confidentially enter, agree to our marketplace terms, our NDAs, everything else, and then hopefully search and match and try to guide them to complete deals. And so we're embracing the tech side for efficiency and scale. I think last time I looked, I think we have something like 4,000 buyers and sellers sitting in the marketplace. Not all
God
of
bless you.
those
That's great. Yeah.
not all of those are active, right?
Yeah.
Which is a key, concern. A lot of our sellers, as everybody knows on this call, they like are interested, but then they get scared or, they're not ready to commit from that side. But our buyer group definitely has grown and everything else. So it's allowed us an opportunity to really, scale the interest and opportunities for those firms. It's intended for law firms doing about 10 million in revenue and under. And then our private market, our traditional business brokerage, M&A advisory is really for firms over that.
Outstanding. Outstanding. And
Hmm.
for the firms that are smaller, and I know you were a little bit of an anomaly because I think there's something like less than 5% of attorneys are also CPAs. So I
Um,
know you're in a pretty small class. Maybe it's even
yeah.
smaller than
Glutton for continuing education, punishment
that.
is my overall aspect. Yes, correct.
But attorneys, do they traditionally have good books and records to come to market with, or do you guys find yourself having to work them over just like we do the rest of the field, if you will?
Yeah, I've adopted, and everybody on the call knows this, but I've adopted the adage, lawyers are not accountants, right?
Ah, yeah.
And so, especially with a lot of small firms, they are tax return, bookkeeping, right? It's like I have enough money every month, so I pull down, this amount as kind of everything. But if you ask them to income statement, P&L, and it's gotten better over the years, definitely,
Mhm.
right? But overall, I used to do like full day workshops, and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to set aside 2 hours for valuation, and we're going to go into it, and I'm going to show everybody like how we're going to do stuff and whatnot. And probably the first one I did about 30, 40 minutes into it, you look into the room and you're like, it's just glossy
It's
eyed.
glazed over.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, they want the story version, right? Not the CPA like exciting, look at my spreadsheet, version to go through it. And so, some definitely are very sophisticated, but by and large, it is not a strength of law firms, right? Or lawyers. They do not teach, accounting in law school. Very few law schools even teach some kind of like how to run a law firm, course or otherwise. And so it is a weakness like a lot of other business, verticals or anything else. And so a lot of what we have to do is, clean up stuff, right? And help them clean up or know the importance of cleaning up.
Mm.
So
And
give
what
us a
is
little.
the, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, give us a little bit of the industry KPIs that you see. What are as you're thinking about it, is there a stratification of $1 to $3 million firms are like this level, three to 10 or the next level? Give us a little bit of framework from which to guide our thinking here.
Yeah, and I was
Yeah,
going to throw in the idea of just the breakdown of the industry, and obviously there's specialties,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that plays into it as well.
sure. Well, let me start with that of kind of like the breakdown, because probably like a lot of other, industries, especially professional, there is a separation. And we're seeing that kind of in market moves. And there is a separation on, of course, just the financials, the KPIs of those firms. Overall, what I would say is you have consumer law firms, which, if you
Uh-huh.
think about consumer practice areas, those are probably mostly closely held, like one owner, maybe two, maybe a couple. But those are your traditional, like think of real estate law, family law, personal injury, trust and estates,
Trust work. Yep.
immigration, right? Everything else that me, the individual, or me, the small business owner, or even as you tier up a little bit, may need from that side. So they are directly kind of marketing B2C for the most part, and those firms have a financial metric and different market moves. And then there's the big guys, right? There's the large mid-tier. Very diversified practice areas, very large firms, everything else. And then we get to what we call the AM law firms, like the top 100, 200 firms, the mega firms, right?
Hmm.
But most of the revenue actually still sits with, the small operators of all
Hmm.
size. And so that's where I really started, was working with that because they didn't have the succession plan. It's not that the big firms have figured it out, just to let we get to always see behind the curtain as brokers, right? And you're like,
Right.
oh man, look at this giant law firm. Like they're going to have everything together. And you pull the curtain, you're like, oh my gosh, this is worse than this firm over here doing 500,000, right? Like
Yep.
these guys are a mess. They're just saved by having more revenues, right? Like they just have a lot more revenues to do that. So I would say that's the separation, and that's really what we're seeing in the market as far as movement on different types of deal structures, who the buyers are. So the consumer side is largely who we deal with, is those individuals closely held, everything else. As far as KPIs, like financial metric KPIs, not getting into multiples or anything yet, profit margin for a healthy, I'll call it that small 1 to 5 million or under 10 million. A healthy margin should be, somewhere around 25 to 30%.
Wow, that's great.
Really, and that's why, there's lots of opportunity, right, for a good, healthy firm. A really good one that started to embrace tech or really kind of built out systems or anything else can really push to 35 to 40%. So they're starting to chase dentists a little bit, as like kind of joke, like some dentist, practice can be there and some other
Hmm.
practices. So there's really healthy margins. Again, as everybody knows, not all of them, right? Some of them are, negative or really low, just kind of they have a job, they haven't built their business even after 40 years, right? To that aspect. But that would be profit margin. The other thing that's a key metric to kind of look at is, attorneys in the firm or paralegals or otherwise are still they are the machines that drive the
Hmm.
revenue for most law firms that haven't fully embraced tech or otherwise. And so the ROI, the productivity of paralegal or associate non-equity, attorneys or anything else, you're always looking at a 2 to 3 times, their cost multiple at least.
Hmm.
For that healthy metric to, make sure that, hey, great, you're an owner, you've got 3 associate attorneys. Let's look at the productivity of those attorneys and the paralegals based on production to make sure that they're really there and can kind of carry forward. The other thing, just looking at, again, the different things, practice areas, key metrics to kind of look at is, plaintiff firms, talking about personal injury, workers' comp, social security, disability, different things like that, operate very different and different models than transactional practices or even
Hmm.
other general civil litigation practices, anything else. So the practice area dependence can really swing margins and just how the firms work or anything else. Like some personal injury firms we have are going to be 50% margins, right? They're just like,
Yeah.
and a healthy one's probably going to be like, you want it to be 35 up, from that structure. And then billing structures are a key aspect to it as well. Plaintiff law firms operate mostly on contingency. They sign cases, they get paid at the end. For us, that's inventory, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's future receivables or anything else. So it's a potential inventory asset that they have. Some firms get paid a fixed fee upfront and then they do the work. Well, that's a credit at closing for remaining work to be completed, anything else. So it can be a seller liability. And then others are hourly, right? So they're just billing their hours, anything else from that side as well. So I'd say the margins, right? Knowing the different practice areas, the different billing structure, and then really focusing in on, attorney or paralegal productivity.
Do most let's say a PI firm, do most PI firms sell to other PI firms? Is that how it is, or is it somebody that may have an adjacent practice that's looking to add that practice to their portfolio? What do you find most prevalently?
Yeah, I think that's something that's shifted really quick in our vertical, probably like some others, that are on the call otherwise. Historically, our best buyer was like, a PI firm would have been another attorney that was a PI attorney leaving, a PI firm as an
Yeah.
employee, wanted to be an owner. Or the best was when they were like defense attorneys. So they were on the other side, insurance defense, and they're like, man,
Yeah.
look at these
Look at
PI
all the money
attorneys.
over there.
Yeah, they'll make the big money. Let's go and do that. And so we transacted some of those, which were great because they know how to litigate, they know how to run the firm. They just have to learn the other side. But what I'd say is it's shifted, and now we have more law firms looking for the geographic expansion. And now private equity is probably the most focused on PI than any other practice area that they're kind of shopping right now pretty early. So, private equity into the space with personal injury. So today I would say we don't have individual buyers of PI practice. We have other law firms that are really looking at, world conquest based on, having a geographic, office in many states, buying those brands, buying the marketing, the funnel intakes, everything else. And then we have, private equity through MSO structures looking at it. Other practice areas, though, I would tell you are still mostly law firms now. We've lost a lot of individual buyers. That switched during COVID for some reason. I kind of equated to a lot of good entrepreneurial attorneys got a lot of big pay raises during COVID because there was lots of work for everybody to be done. And they didn't jump ship as much because they were making good money. But we have some, but it's really been a shift over the last, 5, 6 years.
Hmm. Okay, let's talk multiples now. So
Sure.
is it typically a multiple of the top line? Is it typically a multiple of the bottom line, or somewhere in between? How do the multiples change? And then finally, how do these deals get financed? Are they typically cash deals, or are they financed?
Yeah, absolutely. So multiple kind of going into those separate buckets, right?
Yeah.
So those consumer practices, let's say they're the 1 to 3 million revenue, right? So you can apply
Hmm.
your profit margin if it's somewhere between a 20 and 30%. They're somewhere at a 2 to 3 multiple of the bottom, right?
Okay.
SDE, EBITDA, wherever you want to go with it. But, really looking at that piece. Um, and that's because there's a lot of transfer risk in those smaller firms typically. The smaller firms are tied to personal goodwill of the owner, the founder, right? Which we see in a lot of other businesses. And so buyers, which are usually the other law firms, see that as risk. And there's also transition post close. All of our deals have sellers staying on post close for some time period, some longer than others. But since there's the transfer risk, since there's the hit to cash flow post closing on keeping the seller over, the multiples are a little compressed in those spaces. As you build from that on the consumer practices and start to get up, closer to the 10 million, beyond the 10 million, the multiples really go. and start to increase and can push past the three, right? And people are listening to this, they're like, man, lawyers only get a three multiple? Like, poor lawyers. I know you feel sorry for them, right? Yeah, yeah, everything else. But it's, it's kind of building this market as it is right now. The most interesting part of what we've seen is, certain targeted things where, like personal injury firms that I mentioned, those that have really built up to higher EBITDA numbers, those that have significant brand, less owner dependence, right? The new clients and the revenue is generated through the brand, the marketing. There's a team of operators, there's a team of intake, a team of attorneys. Those are really pushing fast on multiples, right? To the point of we could have a 10 million EBITDA firm last year that would have been at about a four. This year, it probably would be at a six to a seven. And that's just as everybody probably has seen in other spaces, it's the private equity impact. We still have scarcity on those firms, and
Mhm.
private equity and the MSO structures that are looking at them are pretty hungry. And so we're seeing that jump pretty quickly based on competitiveness. And then, as we talked about also that separation, that AM law, they can even bump further because those are muddy based on comp and profit and what really is the mix. But to that point is the multiple can be higher, but it's really trying to get through of how do you get, 200 or 2,000 equity partners to agree to do a deal, right? We
Mhm.
stay out of
Yeah,
those for now.
yeah. Fascinating. Fascinating.
Mhm.
So the other question I've got to ask you is, litigators, if you're trying to put two litigators together, don't they do they ever come to some form of
Do they
consensus? How do
litigate?
you make that
Yeah.
happen? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We thought about having a therapist on our team, right?
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, all jokes aside, I mean, we really thought about it, right? As part of like our seller and, process of kind of going through that. Again, it's hard for lawyers to stop being lawyers. And
Yeah.
so just as stories over the years, I remember we had it's a great attorney. He wasn't even a litigator, but overall, it was in the mountains of North Carolina, Ron. So, like the other side of things, whatever else. But I remember we set it up, we send everything like, hey, the buyer's coming to meet with you. And, they're nervous and this is a change for them. But I talked to the seller afterwards because we weren't there at that follow-up meeting. And they're like, yeah, it went great. And I was like, oh, it did. Well, tell me how it went. They're like, I just treated them like a client. And so I asked them all the questions, right? Everything else. And I just went through things and really made, I said, well, we should have reversed that. Remember what we talked about before this meeting? The buyer is somebody who's asking you the questions. You're just selling the opportunity, right, to go through that. And then we've had other issues, which you were alluding to, Steve, which is, the overall aspect of just lawyers locking horns and being lawyers. Like they can't
Mhm.
stop being lawyers to that. One of the large deals we closed last year was, 40 some $1 million, personal injury firm. And here's this lawyer, again, personal injury attorney. So not transactional, does not review legal agreements on a daily basis, anything else, but they're a lawyer and they have, good transactional counsel involved. But there was a name, image, likeness agreement that came through. And name, image, likeness for those that don't have those in the space like that, so they can, these attorneys are on billboards like,
Yep.
we're, hire us. We're going to
Yep.
so that's a
Billboards,
lot of what they're
commercials. Yeah.
buying is, the name, image, likeness. And even before his attorney could get to it, he's reviewing the agreement. He's, furious, right? Because overall, there is no way, and again, this guy's roots are a litigator, right? So, like, no way, no how, anything else that I'm ever going to agree to allowing them to make AI of like have rights to make, like, I don't know what that's going to be. And the big thing was, hold on, now take off the litigator, right? Like, take off this. You have transactional counsel. What they're going to do is, as everybody knows, work through it to be a compromise structure, everything else. But it's just, lawyers have a hard time not being lawyers, whether they're litigators, transactional, otherwise. It's hard to take off this hat. One of the biggest challenges we have is getting lawyers to hire transactional lawyers to help them
Mhm.
through the deal. It's like
Yeah.
you're a criminal defense attorney. You should not do your own deal, right? And they're like, well, don't you have some templates, right? And you're like, oh, so you should, it's just funny to have lawyers that won't hire lawyers, right? But it's all part of the challenge.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is fascinating. It's interesting how even though the industry is different, some of the pressures are the same. Isn't it? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, it's and the personalities are different but the same, right? From a lot of that. And we've, try to go through when we onboard any seller or we're talking to it or a lot of our materials. The
Uh-huh.
biggest challenge we have with a lot of attorneys, like I think a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, or professionals, it's so much their identity, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about all the time, and I'm sure you guys have talked about it on this and otherwise, is that emotion of like losing my identity as a lawyer, right? Or losing my identity as like I control and run this firm just comes out in weird ways through the
Yeah.
process. And so, like I said, it might be this name, image, likeness agreement that really kind of just explodes things. Or it's, unreasonableness of like, oh, you want $1 million for your firm? Hey, we found you a buyer. They're going to give you $1 million. I think I really need 2 million. You're like, whoa,
Hmm.
like you do, let's go back, right? And it's like gut check time. Like all of a sudden, you're asking me to like focus on not being a lawyer eventually. Like that's really hard for me. I walk down the street and people wave and say, hey, counselor, hey, lawyer, right? Hey, like that's how they know me. And so, like I said, we could probably use a therapist on staff for sure.
Yeah, it's the biggest issue. We call it the day one problem, right? What is the seller going to do day one after the transaction? Because their
Correct.
whole identity changes. If they
Yeah,
don't
we
figure that out, it's a challenge. Yeah.
We call it life after law. You got to have a
There you
plan
go.
for
I love
life
it.
after
Life
law,
after
right?
law.
And
Yeah.
so from that aspect is just had a call this morning with somebody who essentially they're like, have a book we just put out and everything else. And they're like, I read the book and I will tell you, I don't have my plan yet for after, but I do have some things I've started right now. I said, okay, you're on the
Yeah.
right path, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had this question come in, and
Yeah.
if you'd like to ask your question again, use the chat Q&A, raise your hand. All three will get you in. But one of the questions that came in the chat here, and you can probably read it there, guys, is how do you think recent AI trends, replacement efficiency, will affect multiples for law firms over time? Is this why PE is currently willing to pay higher multiples? Any thoughts on that, Tom?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't
It's
say
under
that
the
again.
chat there. It's under the chat. Yeah, so how do you think recent AI trends, replacement efficiency, will affect multiples for law firms over time? Is this why PE is currently willing to pay higher multiples?
Yeah, I think so, right? I think one, I tell everybody, private equity coming to this space. Was some through tech advancement and some through regulatory change, right? So for those that probably don't know, like most law firms have to be owned by lawyers. Jurisdictionally, Arizona, DC, Puerto Rico, over the last few years have kind of changed to allow some form of non-attorney ownership. So that's the regulatory change. Plus, everybody probably knows these MSO structures, that private equity uses over and over again as a vehicle that they've chosen. But the other is tech. And even before AI, there was a lot of advancement and more money going into legal tech than ever before. And that was big players, that was startups, otherwise. And so I think really how things kind of came with private equity is one, they saw regulatory change, which is a good thing. Like they had some openings of where they could come in and acquire or invest in law firms. The other was seeing, okay, a largely human capital driven business, right, for decades and decades and decades, now has tech options that some of these firms were seeing just a huge increase in efficiency. And that was even before AI was just, here. But now that AI is here, absolutely. So I would tell you most private equity, when they put together their managed service organization structure, tech is like a key part of that, right? Is like
Mhm.
that's their first group that they want to deploy after the deal closes. They're going to send their, best in class or at least leading tech solutions into the firm because they know it's a scalability, benefit, and they know it's an efficiency benefit as well as other things like it can drive higher revenues and case values and everything else to get better tech in law firms who historically have been horrible at investing or acquiring their own tech, right? I mean, they've just done things traditionally, anything else. There's a good lawyer friend of mine that had said essentially like, if you go to go see where Abe Lincoln practiced law in Illinois, Like you look and they have it, of course, the building, whatever else, and you look around, you're like, well, there's his law office. It kind of looks just like that office today, right? Of a true
Mm,
practicing attorney, everything else. So there's some things that have not really changed in a long time in law. And I think to that question, yes, they saw the opportunity as well as a lot of the PE that we talked to were rolling out of accounting and CPA, or were starting to exit some of those first investments. And they had seen a great return there, and they were looking at what could be the next potential, and they saw similarities and differences in law.
Yeah, fascinating. And we've got
it,
Tara Lee. Welcome. We got hand raised here. Tara Lee, you're unmuted. We'd love to have your comment or question.
Question is, I seem to get a lot of these and I'm not really sure how to handle them, and I usually turn them away. So this is a timely topic. I have a law firm. It's a one attorney law firm with a paralegal doing about 400,000 in revenue. Net income is 85,000. They're a Schedule C. They don't take a salary. They want to continue to work for several years, when they sell their practice. And so if I factor in then what their salary would be with these numbers, we have a negative EBITDA. And I'm like, well, any number times a negative number is a negative number. And so I come to the conclusion that their only buyer is going to be another law firm.
Yep.
Um, because you can't ask someone that's right out of school to come in and buy themselves a job, and they have no book of business to bring to the table. So is my assessment correct in this sort of a scenario for a B2C attorney firm that has this kind of a profile and these kind of a numbers, that their best buyer is a strategic buyer or another law firm?
Yeah, your assessment is correct, right? And our small practices in our marketplace, we have a framework for those under 500,000 called Counsel Collective. And the reason that under 500 kind of fall in that category is the structure that you just explained, Tara Lee, is what we see, right? Like they may not even be paying themselves, full market value for the salary. But they have a good practice, and they may be in a smaller town or a smaller community, and there would be a law firm that would be willing to kind of acquire that under some terms. But the challenge is it just takes a little bit longer. And as you went through the financials, you assessed it exactly right. You got to find a law firm that says, I can take this 400,000, still maybe pay this attorney some as they want to work and transition down over time, and then have maybe some of our other attorneys do this work and turn it profitable, right? And that's a challenge because sometimes those bigger law firms have higher overhead than the smaller, of course, and so there's just not a deal there. So our counsel collective always are going to be under what we call an of counsel relationship. If you've looked into that, it's really a joinder. Like, hey, you and your paralegal are going to go join this other firm. They are going to potentially pay you some, I know the word earn out and everything else, but some performance metric if they can make the numbers work. And you will be able to transition your community, your referrals, anything else over time to them. And we do, like depending on market, we have firms that are able to work on slim margins, make things more efficient, right? Because they're going to move a lot of things onto their hub, right? And this will just be a satellite community form or otherwise. But yeah, I think you assessed it exactly right. And it's just going to take a little bit longer to find that right one, a little bit tougher. And the true like purchase price isn't always there, right? It's more of that, kind of earn out over time because you got to find a firm that can kind of right the ship to make it profitable.
Appreciate you. That was answering that, because that was a follow-up question, is then you can't really use EBITDA, you can't use SDE. It's mostly a multiple possibly of revenue, but because you can't get into the synergies, you can't say, well, this law firm is not going to have, rent or all of the other subscriptions that you need. And so I can't really provide him with a value per se. It would just be what someone is willing to pay for his practice, which is pretty much the same as anybody who wants to buy a job. That's what they're willing to pay, sort of that mentality. Okay.
Yeah, and it becomes deal terms, right? Deal terms
Yeah.
over purchase price or value. And that's hard for somebody, a lot of times to do that. But it's like, look, as you have done, Charlie, you're adjusting the numbers and you're saying like you're not profitable right now. And so
Mhm.
to try to sell a non-profitable business, and of course, lawyers are good at arguing. So a lot of them will say, well, just let them know if they were to do X and Y and Z and other, right, then they would start making money in year three. And the other part is on the buy side, you're dealing with lawyers. They are risk adverse. And so I
Mhm.
tell everybody there, I have not met a lawyer yet that is ready to lose 3 years of money for a 4-year payoff. There are other investor buyers that are willing to do that, but lawyers want to make money day one after acquisition. And so the margins are kind of compressed because of that, and the financials have to work. So yeah, you've got it as far as assessment. And a lot of times I would just say talk to that, law firm operator, like who are those peer firms in maybe neighboring areas that you think do great work, anything else that we could approach for you to be, like have them be your succession plan, right?
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks for coming on, Tara Lee.
Thank you.
Wow. So lawyer buyers are just like every other buyer, lecherous bastards, right? They want to return right up front. Wow. Who would
Yep,
have ever thought?
Another
exactly.
Hey,
question came in. How do you handle case inventory in a PI firm transaction?
Yep. So when you look at, of course, wind down value or asset value, it's going to be an asset that we're going to, typically largely rely on those sellers to go through and value. We may get involved or we may bring in other consultants to really do a deep dive on auditing some files. But most of the time, and the hope is they know their cases the best, right? If they've been a practicing PI attorney for 30 years, it's always hard to push them like, hey, what do you think these cases are worth? And they're like, I don't know. I could get a call tomorrow and it could be nothing. And it's like, sure, you could. But you also know over 30 years of practice, it's probably worth, and they're like, you know, 300,000. Okay. Right. And so it's just going through the data because buyers going to look at that as well. And they will pull, case audits and everything else. So we value it as an asset. We value it, of course, if it has an impact on future receivables. But we really look at it in a negotiation side as well, different than some other practice areas. Like that's a big receivable. And so when we're dealing with those risk adverse, very conservative lawyer buyers or others, we start with, hey, look, at the end of the day, they could really close the firm and just kind of, get what's remaining of this inventory. So that's where our negotiations start as that value and then kind of go from there. So we do value it, through cooperation with sellers or bringing in other consultants. It's a key part of why there is kind of an added security to plaintiff practices, not just PI, Social Security, disability, workers' comp, those as well, and others that kind of have contingency type structures. But it is one of those things that you have to go through. The best is when you reach larger scale PI because you can really, based on history, just start to say, your historical average of a case a fee per case is 20K, right? That means they had a fee they probably earned that was 1 million, and they had some that didn't settle out, right, and they got nothing, but their average is about 20,000. And so once they get above like 500 cases in inventory or 1,000, it becomes a lot easier to kind of just look at that. And then you always have outliers. And look, these plaintiff attorneys are going to tell you like this is a case that's going to be worth, and I couldn't sell the firm, right? And so it's just how you deal with those outliers through value and potentially, deal structure is a key part as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, it sounds like all those are negotiable deal points that you can work in, right? Because there could be some potential windfall in the future that sellers don't want to let go of, and buyers are looking to reap, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, I want to return to the question on the tech stack. So many industries have like a common tech stack. Do attorneys' offices have that as well? Are there particular technology ingredients that you think they must have in place and others that are kind of optional for law firms?
Yeah. Well, again, you would hope every law firm has QuickBooks or some similar accounting software, right? As we were talking
Right.
about a little bit earlier and everything else. Not all do, but overall, it's like that financial data is, of course, the key to everything. So making sure it's not just entered and they don't have just a huge category that has never been reconciled year by year that says ask accountant, right? And that shows
Mhm.
up in 2023, 24, 25, and you're like, was this never actually asked of the accountant? Like, how did this happen? But from that side, the other is from a base side is CRM, right? Software that for a lot of them is embedded in their practice management software, which may be specific to the practice area. So the behemoth, practice software that's out there for most lawyers in the consumer space is Clio. They're a Canadian software company. They've been probably the biggest generic player across the board. But there is more specific ones based on practice. So personal injury won't use Clio, right? They're going to use some of the new ones that come up. Now there's AI softwares that they're adding on to that, right? There's better marketing softwares than the typical CRM or case management that they use. So I would say it still probably depends heavily on the practice area, based on the tech stack that they're using. But from an overall aspect, it would be great for them to have some kind of marketing CRM and then some kind of case or client management billing system so you can really pull that data from it and then reconciled hopefully with a QuickBooks or QuickBooks type software to do that. We're seeing really cool things. I mean, we've had firms that have built their own software, right?
Hmm.
Especially with like AI now and everything else. We have firms that have really taken like this, it's a personal injury software, but they've moved it over and they're using it for their immigration practice with like huge success. And I think there's more coming, right? Like when we look at the investment that's really gone into legal tech, some of that's scary now with AI, like what everything is happening with Claude and the ability to just create. But overall, there's a lot more that's come into the space. But I would say, definitely that accounting package, the marketing CRM, and then the case client management, because, like going to ask a law firm owner, like, where do your clients come from? And the answer, I don't know, is not a good
Hmm.
one to kind of
Not a good answer
to
to
buyers.
that.
And so we have a lot of those and historically been like, well, let's start tracking now. And at least we'll have a 3 month data set or something else to kind of go through it. But I would say the newer practices or next generations, they are relying heavily on that tech stack. So they are buying in and they are moving, right? If it doesn't work or they grow beyond it, they are moving to the next one that works for them for sure.
Yeah.
When you do a transaction, is there a client notification requirement for law firms?
Yeah, depending on structure, right? Rule 1.17 is the ABA, right? The American Bar
Okay.
Association. And then most states have adopted that. Like, we're here in North Carolina, they've adopted 1.17. South Carolina has their own adoption with a little bit different spin. Most states have adopted it, but that's saleable law practice. And it actually does kind of say you must notify clients, right? So if you go through a traditional sale, that means it doesn't mean you're doing a partnership or otherwise. You have to notify clients. We use that as a marketing opportunity to meet ethical responsibilities, right? And of course, coach up most of our sellers because they're very worried about notifying clients. And I said, look, lawyers leave firms and move to different firms all the time, right? For you to be joining potentially a bigger firm as this, acquisition may play out, your buyer is sometimes bigger than you. Said it's a very exciting time to communicate to clients about this change and all the extra resources and everything else you're bringing. And, we love to do like invite them to open houses if you have physical offices or invite them to get to know you of the team and resources. And we just haven't had that be an issue as much as probably everybody knows, like when you send this, where it has been an issue is where they haven't listened to us. And like the buyer sends out a notice that's like, I now run the firm. And
Mm.
one, it's not the ethical compliant way to do it. And two, that's where you're going to lose clients or get a lot of angry or kind of in fear phone calls, anything else. Most of our lawyers are very worried about, they feel like these clients, they know me, right? Compared to other businesses or anything else. And when we go through and we tell them it's transition after sale, the biggest thing that's funny is, like they send out notices like I'm very excited. Call me. Let's grab lunch. Let's do this referral sources. And it's funny how many of their feelings are hurt by how quick the clients are like, oh, yeah, thanks, John. See you later. Right. I love the new firm now. I love the new people. And they're like, this has been my, this client, this is one of those that I thought was going to be attached to me. We'd have a hard problem. And then usually it's the ones they try to get rid of, right? That are like, oh, well, that's great. That's great. You have these new people, but I only want to deal with you, right? You've been my estate
You've
planning
been
attorney.
my person forever. Yeah.
Yeah, you've been my estate planning attorney for 20 years. And he gets to say, I haven't seen you in 20 years. Like I did a will for you 20 years ago, right? So, yeah, it's that ethical requirement that should be followed. And it's just good practice, right? To not surprise clients or anything else. And to do that as a mutual decision, mutual marketing message, everything.
Somebody was asking in the
Aside,
chat just about the staff staying in place. Is that an issue?
yeah,
Keeping staff?
yeah,
Yeah.
is that fairly normal in a transition, particularly for larger than a single attorney office, where the staff goes with the new company, the new acquirer?
Yeah. Uh, it would be a rarity that a buyer we would have would not want the staff, right? It's
Mhm.
hard, as everybody knows, hard as anything to find good people. And so, especially if that attorney is going to be leaving or slowing down or transitioning, like there's practices like residential real estate where the paralegals know the mortgage brokers and the real estate brokers and everybody that really drives revenue better than the attorney. And
Mhm.
so they're very more concerned buyers are that, the paralegal's going to stay or, key attorneys that maybe, do a lot of the work. So yes, I would say there's always a welcome home for them if they're good. And, to the selling attorney, that's a lot of times their motivation or fear is I need to retire, but, my team's not ready to retire for maybe another 5 years, 10 years otherwise. And so it gives an opportunity to keep them going and everything else with your handpicked successor.
Excellent. We also have a question in the chat about are there any special funding companies in specifically in that space, folks that just specialize in legal firms?
There are, of course, some lenders that have carved out law. SBA is still our go-to, just across
Is
the
it?
board. Yeah. So, Ron and I talk about Live Oak being here in our neighborhood in
Sure. Yeah.
Wilmington and everything else. But other good SBA lenders that have been in professional space, right? And everything else are still the go-to. In personal injury and some of those plaintiff practices, private equity lending, like, true private equity
Okay.
lending is a strong thing, and they will lend on deals. Otherwise, though, we have not built to a model yet with like banks that have just kind of like dental, where like B of A or otherwise just have like their practice solutions, and they're like, great, we'll
Hmm.
offer 100%, and be very competitive. We're not there yet.
Hmm.
Yeah, in the medical field, there is a good amount of that, very very specialized. Yeah, I was wondering about that, and then partner buyouts too. So, but I think under the SBA, you can do a partner buyout if they've been there more than 2 years, and they can get up to is it up to 100% financing in those scenarios as well?
I believe so. Yeah, I'd have to check. I know that some of those regs changed like last year and
Yeah.
others because one of the big SBA kind of roadblocks we had was, sellers can't stay on, right,
Right.
past 12
Right.
months, and that's changed a little bit and everything else with those partner buyouts because our sellers, some of them do stay on past 12. And and there's different ways to structure that, but just be in full compliance. Some of them because they don't want to leave. They're just not going to own the firm. They're going to keep practicing law or do something else. And so a little more flexibility now than there was a few years ago, for sure.
What about buyers? I know you guys have a large database of buyers. Is there a percentage that you just sell internally because you already have the buyer list, or are you putting on the marketplaces, or are there other ways that you're going after buyers?
Yeah, we stopped putting on marketplaces a few years ago. So buyers, especially post-COVID, like it's just funny how so much changed. Like we were talking about the virtual, like hopping on Zoom pre-COVID versus post-COVID. But really, buyers started to creep up significantly post-COVID. I think because they could see virtual management, law firms, they could manage law firms in other towns, everything else. But overall, it's just all us as far as driven through the marketplace and through our database that has been acquired over the last almost decade and a half. We'll still do some outreach based on certain firms, But overall, no, even our marketplace is probably 70-30, 70% buyers, 30% sellers. So we
Hmm.
have an abundance of buyers, not qualified buyers, but buyers by category interested in the concept, maybe just need a little bit more, prep and otherwise to get to that qualified stage. But definitely more buyers in the space than sellers.
Is there
So what do you?
anything
Go
special
ahead,
about
Steve.
a listing package for a law firm? I typically tend to think of we'll have teasers, kind of blind teasers out there, and then we'll have a full sim, maybe a short sim, and then maybe a full financial analysis. Is what do you think of as a typical package for a deal you're representing?
I think it's going to be the typical, kind of business sale package, right? So we're going to do the teaser, the confidential listing, and then
Yeah.
of course, for private market clients, we're doing a detailed SIM, we're doing a detailed financial analysis, that comes from our market valuation, everything else. We're
Yeah.
going to try to bring all those reports. Probably the biggest thing though is like, what is the transition plan? Of the seller and trying to drill down a little bit on that because that is a buyer concern that can be kind of checked off early and give them comfort. And so it's really trying to go through a seller to say, what does the transition plan need to be? And a lot of times they'll be like, well, whatever, depending on what the buyer wants, I'm good with that. I'm like, nope, let's go and look at like your referral sources or what you do on a day to day and then what that timeline looks like and really trying to detail that out and then bringing buyer to mesh those. But I think that gives buyer, a lot of comfort if you say, seller's willing to stick around for 2 years, right? And then deal terms is probably the other. I don't know how many, Sims, show real deal terms, but those that we know, like we talked about earlier, like the smaller practices willing to do a percentage
Mhm.
of revenue or otherwise, that's important because otherwise they wouldn't get interest. So we probably include deal terms in some of those Sims a little bit more than some others because we're not anticipating, 100% cash at closing on any of the deals. So it's giving buyers the
Okay.
comfort like, hey, this seller is looking for X percentage down and then is willing to do a variable note or an earnout percentage or something else to essentially ensure that transfer happens.
Yeah, and that it
We're
sounds like the sellers kind of come into the transaction with that mindset, so you're not having to convince them that they've got to go that way.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All
absolutely.
right.
Tom, with only a minute or two left. A few questions that come up. We usually like to ask this at the end. And I want to remind people too, before I ask this question, that if they'd like to work with Tom, maybe you can put your website or email into the chat there, Tom,
Sure.
for anybody that wants to reach out to you and open to co-brokering referrals, marketplace, a lot of good stuff going on from Tom. So I want to invite everybody to, as we often do, a lot of our experts, you just go, look, this is a good person to know. And but we always end with this question, Tom, of just what's the future? A few questions, obviously, as how is AI impacting things? So, what do you think? Quick 1 minute answer on what's the future of the industry and how is AI specifically? What do you see the impact being? Any quick final thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's going to have a significant impact into certain practice areas. And those lawyers that are first movers right now will have a defensible position to that AI impact. I mean, Claude came out with a whole package, just Claude for legal, right? That can redline agreements, everything else, and it's pretty good. So for a lot of lawyers, that was their bread and butter. Like, send me an agreement, I'll do this. And so I think it will have an impact. It will definitely fuel consolidation. If you don't, then it'll kind of be a loss of value event in the future. It'll be harder to sell those, except for they still have relationships, right? So we have players right now, I know this a little bit longer, but like that have the tech platforms that are looking to kind of scoop up those traditional and move them onto a proven tech platform.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Yeah, this is obviously that's an
Hey,
obvious. Go ahead, Steve.
quick follow up to that. How do you guys use AI?
Yeah, so we use it. We have a full-time AI builder. And so
Oh, do
again,
you?
having the marketplace, we're always looking at building different tools and resources and everything else. I mean, I love listening to what you guys have built in this community, right? Because that's the goal is, provide those resources. So right now we're using that AI builder for our internal efficiencies, right? Kind of
Uh-huh.
looking at that. I mean, one of our AI builds is just so we can search. We use HubSpot, which used to be great. And now every time you see what AI does, you're like, man, HubSpot's kind of clunky and slow and everything else. Right? A year and a half ago it was awesome.
Yeah.
But it's just the ability to go through, find a quick database search, right? So we're using AI to kind of pull and search that. We're going through different things and kind of experimenting with just different team efficiencies on that side, just meeting briefs, right? So you got an upcoming meeting and using AI to kind of say, hey, just to let you know, you got this meeting with Steve and Ron coming up. Here was your last meeting. Here's your notes. Here's what you need. Would you like me to create a PowerPoint agenda for you? Just put that up there, and so you can hop on the Zoom and be ready to go. So just that, and then we'll start deploying some of those internal tools externally into the marketplace. But yeah, it's fun. I mean, I can't keep up with it because it really does seem to be
Nobody can.
accelerating at lightning speed.
Yeah, for sure. It's hard to keep up, but it's fun stuff. And um, Tom, it's awesome. Looking forward to
Yeah.
grabbing coffee with
Fantastic.
you now that I know that you're in
Fantastic.
Wilmington, and really appreciate you taking the time with us and educating our industry. We'll have this, guys, in the Business Broker HQ community probably tomorrow. We'll get you a copy, Tom, and yeah, it'll be part of that Ask AI. So if you guys want to, if you forget and you're like, oh, I can't find that, then just go to the businessbrokerhq.com and you'll be able to search for it very easily using our AI tool that we built. And that's the crazy thing, how quickly you can build and launch these things. But really looking forward to the next episode, Steve, in a few weeks. And Tom, thanks again. You and Lauren
Thanks
coming
so
on,
much.
and we
It was
certainly
great, Tom.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll see everybody soon. Hopefully, I think the next episode for become a better business broker is next Tuesday. And we hope that everybody can join you there. We'll see everyone soon. Thanks so much. Take care. Thanks,
Take
Tom.
care.